Hey everyone, welcome to your second home group for the month of January. For this home group, we're going to talk about the vice versa of turning from reaction to interaction. You see, when things happen in our lives, we often have a tendency to react quickly and negatively. For example, I used to play a lot of backyard football when I lived in Florida. And we would play for hours and hours, and all of the neighborhood kids would come because we had this large side yard that was owned by the city that we would play football on. And I remember specifically one day a reaction moment in my life when one of the older kids had called me a name or told me I was no good. I can't really remember the specifics, but I came out swinging. And my brother ran towards my mom and said, "Jack is punching everyone." That would be a reaction story. An interaction would look a little bit more like this, in which somebody says something that aggravates you, or does something that aggravates you, or does something that maybe you just don't understand. And instead of reacting negatively immediately, an interaction comes with a curiosity about that other person. We find here in the scriptures that Jesus frequently interacts with people with a profound sense of curiosity, patience, and love. We're going to look at a similar passage to one that we read a couple months ago, in which a woman comes before Jesus, breaks a jar of perfume, and wipes Jesus' hair, or wipes her hair on Jesus' feet. But the difference is, Jesus tells a parable in this gospel that he didn't tell in the gospel before that we read. And the parable says this, that a certain moneylender had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they could not pay, he canceled the debt. Now which one of them would love him more? And I think this brings up an interesting question about each of our faiths. I don't think that Jesus is suggesting that we should go out and do some grand sin so that we may be forgiven, that we may love God more. But perhaps Jesus is suggesting that when we invite those who have committed and lived lives full of sin and of hatred to turn and follow the loving God, perhaps we will see great stories of love. I remember there was a guy named Pastor Frank in Orlando who had dealed cocaine until about the age of 20. And he was introduced to Christ around that time and turned around his life and began preaching the gospel to the same streets, the same kids that he would sell cocaine to in his earlier years. I think of people like that, and I know that this story speaks to them. They love more because they have been forgiven more. Now you may be asking, "Jack, I thought that all sins were weighted equally in the eyes of God." And I think that part of that is true. I think that part of the way that we look at sin is true in that way. However, when God views sin, God sees it less as actions that we took that were wrong, but more as steps we took away from God. So those who have lived lives that are walking further and further away from God, when they are invited back and their debts are forgiven, we find great amounts of love. So here's my invitation. Who are those people in your lives that have walked further and further away from God? How can you show them God's great love and great forgiveness in their lives? Perhaps even you have walked away from God in the past week, in the past month, or in the past year. And God is inviting you again to be forgiven, to accept that grace that he gives to us on the cross. And in response, we are called to give great love to God and to our neighbor. As you read through the scripture, ask poignant questions. Be curious as you look into these words. As always, I am with you and I am for you, and I'm praying for your home groups this week.